Everyone? Okay, you don't need that. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us. My name is David. This event is being recorded by the Kensington Village Association. Happy to have you all here tonight. I'm going to go to gallery view so we can see everybody. As always, we begin by remembering that these events take place on the traditional lands of Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, Lenape, Arawanda, neutral people in a dish with one spoon, or an area covered by the dish with one spoon wampum. And we remember some of these lands were ceded, some of them were under treaty. We're all treaty peoples, and respectful relations among nations are important. We're going to hear from a number of folks tonight about plants and animals and things in the neighborhood. Beginning with Chris, who I think can share his own screen and show us what he needs to show. And just in case you're wondering, we've got 7 panelists here and 14 people in attendance beyond that. We'll let everybody know who's coming up. And Chris, you can identify yourself. I'm going to stop my video and go to mute, and maybe the other folks could do that as well. And then we'll hear from Chris. Thanks very much.
Great, thank you, David. My name's Chris, and I'm going to be talking about the environment in our Cavendish Park, and leading on to talk about the plants that we find growing here. So if I can just start the PowerPoint. So I'm talking about natural environments. This is a view looking down over the park and the Forward Avenue, Cavendish area with Riverside run along behind.
Don't forget to share your screen, Chris. Sorry to interrupt.
Sorry, is it not sharing?
No.
Okay, sorry, let me go back. Escape.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, it shows I'm sharing screen here.
Okay, I'm not. Dave Jolly, I'm just going to mute your camera for now. Okay. Now you're sharing, Chris. Go for it.
Okay, is that working?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So F5. Right. There we go. Okay, so what I'm going to do is talk about the basic landscape units we have here, and I won't talk about drainage today. Talk about the natural environments and the habitats which we have in the park. Talk about some of the native and alien plants, and end up with just really posing some questions about managing this balance of an urban ecosystem with native and alien plants. So here's where we were last time. This is the 3D view. I've stripped off the houses and the plants for now. And that's the park with the railway embankment running through in the front and the Thames cutting across. And the roads there just give us some idea. There's Forward Avenue curling around, and Cavendish and Walnut in the background there. So the blue is the high ground and the green is the low ground. So the basic environments we have in our backyard here is a number of them, really progressing from the river up onto the higher ground. So we start off with the river, which is sort of gravel bars, which are flooded periodically. And then adjacent to the river is a flat area that's called the floodplain, because it floods pretty well every year, and sometimes multiple times a year. And so this is a flat area of ground where it gets a new dump of silt every year when the river sweeps through. Up higher than that is the old riverbed, which the river's abandoned and cut down from, is what's called a terrace. And most of Forward Ave and Maurice and Murdoch and Wood are all sitting up on the terrace. And the landscape we referred to last time over at the east end of the park is the old landfill site. And this is mostly the grassed area with the work depot there. And if we zoom in a little bit and look at the landscape, we can see these elements. I've overlaid the trail system more or less on there in the red so that you can possibly look over this afterwards and figure out where you are and which bit of landscape you're on. So the elements are the river, the floodplain, the terrace, and the landfill. And so the other thing in which I won't be talking about much today, there's also a trunk sanitary sewer runs right across underneath the park. And this disturbed the habitat a little bit when it was put in, created a bit of a berm which dammed some of the water. So basically each of those landscape units, those 4 landscape units, has its own particular soil. The river we look at and see the gravel and sandbars and the water there. The floodplain is generally here pretty silty, with patches of clay where the water's been standing and some sand where there's been little channels running through in some of the floods. The terrace, certainly up over most of the sort of forward and Murdoch area, is an underlying gravel with some really deep loam. It's actually beautiful soil. A lot of it came from the river, then it had a dusting of dust came in from wind-blown dust as the ice retreated. So that's given us really good soil through here. The landfill's not quite so happy. It's a garbage with a cap of clay and a dump of pit-run gravel was put over the top. So they were really not well sorted out. So we have a less desirable area of soil over to the east there. So given that underlying landscape elements, this creates a series of different environments where the plants and animals are living. And if we run through the basic elements here, we have the manicured park, the mowed grass, which really is not very interesting from the plant and animal point of view. The whole idea is to suppress any kind of extraneous growth and keep it low and in control. Then there's areas of abandoned mown grass, which ideally we would call meadow, but really if you just abandon a area of mown grass without any other management, you end up with just rough grass because the grass takes over and other plants don't really grow very well. So that's the rough grass area. But if you do leave the rough grass, eventually some shrubs and trees appear either naturally or through people planting them. About half the plants, the small trees in that picture, I think were planted artificially, about half are natural. And you get a young forest springing up. And as the young forest grows, you get more shade, and eventually the grass disappears and you get understory plants which are tolerant of shade, or else they come up really early in the spring and have a short life cycle where they exploit the light before the leaves come onto the trees. So that's mature forest. We've got another interesting environment along the edge of the park. For years, Springbank Dam meant that the river flooded up to a high level through the summer. It was fun to play on, but it was eroding the banks quite badly. And since the dam was abandoned, the area that used to be flooded every summer has started to revert back to forest. So it's a young forest developing right adjacent to the river. And so this has been progressing within the last 10 or 15 years. Those trees have all moved in there, and they will eventually build up the silt and turn into a floodplain and be covered in forest. So this is our basic landscape elements, the terrace and the floodplain and the river there. We've got mowed grass in the back, rough grass where they used to mow it and have stopped mowing, the young forest where the grass is gradually being replaced by trees, the more mature forest, still not really a very old forest by Ontario standards, but it's certainly older than the young forest, the river edge, and of course then the river, which is the fish habitat. So those are our basic habitats here. So that's a quick summary: the mowed grass, the rough grass, and the forest, the river edge, and the river. So the question we ask then is this static or dynamic? Because static would be easy because we're able to say, that's it, we've got all these things. But unfortunately, it's a dynamic environment. So if we look at these environments and we start off with mowed grass over on the left here, if we let the mowed grass be, it turns into rough grass. And if we let the rough grass stay, it turns into a young forest. Keep that going, it turns into a mature forest. If the river bar is continually flooded, it stays as a river bar. And if it stops being flooded, it'll turn into the river edge, into a young forest, as we just saw, and then eventually everything ends up as being mature forest. But there are things we can do like mowing, which keep the rough grass and the mowed grass as mowed grass. And there are things that go on in forests like fires or death of trees or clear cutting, which can take a mature forest back into a young forest where everything will start over again. So it's a very dynamic environment that we have here. And what makes it dynamic is the plant species which move in and out. So we have a whole range of species here, some of which are native. In other words, they're normally growing and seeding in the area. And significance of native species is they've been around for a while, so they know how to survive, and they have controls which stop them over proliferating. Things browse on them. They're part of a balanced ecosystem. So you find native species usually come along with a balanced diversity of wildlife. And in contrast to that, we have a whole host, and actually the dominant plants in the park are introduced alien species. They're plants which wouldn't normally be found growing here, and they've been introduced by accident or on purpose. And many of these introduced species are actually valuable crops and ornamentals. They're valuable in their own right. The difficulty with introduced species is they're not necessarily integrated and linked into the ecosystem. So they may not be a natural way for them to seed themselves. They may not be predated on, and there may be no diseases or pests. So they may be able to grow without the normal constraints that they have in their home environment. And there's a particular category of these alien species, which is a worry in a park area like this, which are the invasive species. And these are ones where they are so rampant that they take over and overwhelm the native plants and don't necessarily feed a diversity of wildlife. So they lead to a kind of an unnatural ecosystem where you have a very limited number of plants and a limited number of animals are able to survive on them. So this is a bad thing. And we do have alien invasive species which are taking over parts of the park. So let's think about these plants then. We've got the trees and the herbaceous plants, which are things that spring up every year, then disappear over the winter. And let's start off looking at the trees. So in the young forest, we find these examples here. There's a lot of different kinds of trees, so I'm only going to look at a few. For example, the poplar and the willow, and the Manitoba maple and the buckthorn. And the big willow trees and the buckthorns are not native. They're alien species. And there's even questions about Manitoba maple, whether it really is a native species here or whether it's been introduced. In a mature forest, we find things like red maple and walnut and sycamore. So let's just have a look at some of these plants so we can get an idea of what we're looking at here. This is some of the common maples. The red maple is sometimes called the swamp maple, likes to grow in the backwaters of floodplains. Maples is sometimes difficult to tell apart, but in the spring, the red maple has these very distinctive red flowers that you see coming out very early before pretty well anything else. And that's the way you can easily detect a red maple. There's not a lot of red maples around. What we do have lots of is the Manitoba maple. This is a distinctive one because it actually has 3 or 5 leaflets, and as opposed to the single maple leaf. These are the trees which grow very quickly and then fall over. If you see a tree that's lying on its side and still growing in the bush, it's almost certainly a Manitoba maple. They're the laziest of trees. They don't have very good roots around here. There seems to be a root blight, and they're not particularly long-lived. The Norway maple is a very widely planted tree. It's an extremely strong growing tree. It seeds like crazy, and it's been widely planted along the streets and in backyards. I've got probably 2 or 3 still in my own backyard, and they seed everywhere. And so that counts as an alien invasive species brought over from Europe. Perhaps the most important tree in the past has been the black walnut, which grows in floodplain areas because it's a food crop. It's a very strong growing tree, likes to live down on the floodplain, and it produces very distinctive green fruit. Be careful in the fall, because when you walk under a black walnut, these things can really hit you on the head. I actually wear a hard hat when I go out into the backyard under the walnuts in the fall, because they can really hurt if they hit you on the head. But if you peel off the outer green cover, the rind, you get these nice black walnuts, which are pretty difficult to crack and get the meat out of, but are actually very tasty. You'll also end up with black stains all over your fingers, because the juice of the walnut is a natural black stain. It's also been prized as a wonderful lumber. There's a picture over on the left there of a table with some black walnut, and the heartwood is a beautiful, almost purple color, which gradually fades to a golden brown. So walnuts are an important tree, and they've been establishing very well down there. Another famous, well-known floodplain tree is a sycamore. Very distinctive bark and little pom-poms that dangle from the branches. Very late to leaf out, and sometimes you think it's dead, but it's still going. And so my challenge to anybody who's looking at this is see if you can spot the sycamores down there. There's at least 2 big trees down in Cavendish Park, and see if you can spot them and look for their fruit coming along. A useful resource here is the City of London some years ago started to inventory all the trees in the city. They didn't get around to doing the wood lots, but they did do most of the open freestanding trees, and you can actually click on any tree. I clicked on this little tree here, and if you zoom in, when you click on it, it comes up and it says its diameter of 40 centimeters, presumably. Cavendish Park is the location. The species is the European elm, and that's about the information available on it. I've circled it in here where it is on the map, and there's the tree. It's a European elm, not looking very well. Looks like it's succumbing to Dutch elm disease, standing there, and seeded itself in that location. So that's a resource that you might want to check out if you're interested in spotting the trees and knowing what they are. Herbaceous plants, let's go away from the big trees and look underneath and closer to the ground. And as I said, they're predominantly aliens growing in this area. One of the really interesting ones that's been doing very well in the last few years with a little bit of help from various people is the fiddlehead fern, which sends up these marvelous shuttlecocks of leaves in the summer. And of course, the fiddleheads are a treat in the spring. Do eat these with caution for 2 reasons. One is that if they're overpicked, they can damage the plant and limit its life. The other thing is they are mildly toxic. So if you cook them, boil them in water and dispose of the water a couple of times just to leach out the toxin, is my understanding. Another common plant which is doing quite well down there, and I've been certainly, when I find the seed head, this beautiful red fruit, I scatter them around, and I've been rewarded by these things popping up everywhere. It's a beautiful plant, well worth peering under the leaf and looking at the beautiful structure of the flower. Sometimes they're almost black, sometimes they're almost light green, so they do vary quite a bit. And if you look really carefully, occasionally you'll find one with 5 leaves rather than the typical 3 leaves on the flower. Don't try eating this one; it's toxic and can be harmful. There is another Jack in the pulpit which is starting to appear a little bit down there called the green dragon, and it's just starting to come into flower without any leaves. So be on the lookout for that in the next week or so. If you are in the park, look out for poison ivy. I don't know of any in the main park, but if you go west of the tracks, go under the railway tracks into the meadow, there is an abundance of poison ivy there, which you have to be careful of. So do be careful, unsupervised kids going in there. Don't go ramping around, you'll regret it. So there's some of the native plants. Let's look at some of the aliens from outer space or from elsewhere in the world. One of the most popular ones down there is certainly the what are called wild phlox, which isn't really a phlox. Phlox have 5 petals. They're actually stalks, and they're a beautiful scented flower in abundance. They're just starting to flower now out there at the end of May, and they vary from white through to this sort of mauvey magenta color. And a beautiful scent will permeate the air in the evening. So it's one of those aliens. It takes over, smothers everything else, but it sort of delivers as well in being beautiful. Less appealing is the garlic mustard, which is a plant that it's a biennial, which means it grows and forms leaves one year, then the next year it sends up these stems and flowers and sets seed, then dies. But it sows millions and millions of seeds, and they just keep coming up. The garlic mustard also is reputed to exude a herbicide from its own roots, which kills off any competing plants. So it's very difficult to establish or maintain any sort of native plants if you've got garlic mustard around. It's fairly easy to control. Right now, if you pull it, it uproots fairly easily, and the flowers won't have set seeds, so you can actually control it reasonably easily, but it's an ongoing process. You can't just assume once you've done it, that's it. It has to be done every year. Getting a bit more serious, the Japanese knotweed is being described as ineradicable. This is a monster. Sometimes people call it bamboo. It's not a bamboo. It's a herbaceous plant, sends up enormous great hollow stems and prolific underground roots, and it gradually drives out everything else. You can see what a dense thicket it is. Seems to have been introduced when the city did some work on the drain about 10 years ago, and now it's ramping out of control. I've actually been trying to control it in one area, and it's taken about 10 years of completely pulling every stem every month for the last 10 years. And it's still coming up, but it's more or less disappeared, making room for the garlic mustard. So you can't win. This is something to really look out for. I found it twice down in the park, and you've got to be really cautious. This is a toxic plant where the sap can cause a nasty burn. I had a burn from giant hogweed that the scar lasted for 3 years. And so if you find a cow parsley plant like this, which is taller than a person, steer clear and notify the city. We really has to be handled by people wearing hazmat suits or with extreme caution. So be careful. I've managed to eliminate the plants that I found, but it could come back. The basic rule is the bigger a hogweed plant is, the more dangerous it is. So there's about 4 or 5 species around down there now. Almost all of them are alien, and some of them are taking over. And we'll have to see how that develops. So this is one of the big questions is alien versus native plants. And native plants generally are more desirable because they're balanced with the ecosystem. So with the native plants come other native plants and various insects and animals that live on them and live on the insects. So it's a more integrated network. They're normally adjusted to the climate. They and they're often not going to ramp out of control. They live alongside everything else. They can be vulnerable to disturbance, and we know from some of the history of the park, the whole area has been disturbed. None of it is a pristine landscape. Whereas alien plants are not linked in with the ecosystem and can blow out of control. They're not eaten by things. They tend not to have the diseases and pests that would keep them under control. So they can spread like crazy, or they may just die out if they don't survive the hard winter. There was a nasty balsam appeared a couple of years ago, and it didn't survive the cold winter, and haven't seen it since. So it's a nasty alien, but the winter seems to have kept it off. With time, alien plants do gradually, often with a bit of help from people like Ministry of Natural Resources, often can settle into the ecosystem. You can't defeat them. So the idea is to bring in pests, or to encourage pests to predate on them and keep them under control, as long as the pests themselves don't get out of control. So it's a delicate balance, but sometimes that's a more effective solution when you can't control them by complete elimination. One of the questions we're facing in current times and in an urban environment is the stresses we place on our plants, and many of the native plants aren't unlikely to survive climate change. They are, things like trilliums are unable to deal with warm periods in winter. They start to come into growth far too early and then get killed by frost. So climate change may be meaning that our idea of native plants is no longer sustainable. And the question people are asking now is, what plants are we going to be living with in our future? Are some of these aliens going to be better adapted to a stable environment than some of the natives that will not survive? And do we actively manage these ecosystems, as they do in much of Europe now, to build environmental resilience rather than just letting nature take its course? It's a tricky question. And the kind of thing that we're talking about here is a lot of work. So if you want to maintain the grass and diversify the plants, you'll have to be seeding and mowing and weeding to control them. You can't just let it be if you want to have a diverse meadow develop. If you want to maintain a forest in some form, you have to plant the trees you want, because maybe there isn't a seed source for the particular plant in the natural setting. You'll have to weed out the competition. You'll have to take out the big trees which are overshadowing the smaller ones that you want to grow on, for example. In terms of maintaining wetlands or non-wetlands, you have to manage flooding and drainage. But the idea is you actually end up with an environment like a meadow, or a fen, which is a type of wetland, or a parkland, which is a grassland with small trees in it, or a marsh adjacent to the river, wetland area, or a forest. So in other words, this is more of a design system which is, requires active management. This all assumes you know what you're doing and you know how to actually arrive at these different solutions, which in many cases we don't know. It's often the management strategies are unknown. The one lesson that I have from years of trying to control these things and grow initially predominantly native species before I gave up and decided to diversify is there is a continual assault of predators like deer coming in, and I planted out, I would say 90% of the native trees that I've planted have been destroyed by deer, probably more like 98%. And so you have to actually start to say, okay, so do we need to put protective cages around them? And then with all of these invasive aliens, there is what's called seed drift. Every winter, the flood comes in and washes new seed in, and the spring is here, and it's another round of weeding to get rid of the things you don't want. If you keep a handle on it, it's good. If you miss a year, you'll pay for the next 10 years. So this is the idea of active management, which is one of the things which I think we have to think about when we start looking at the distribution of plants. And there are a number of aliens down there which we probably need to start being active about before they completely take over. And that's the end of my talk. Thank you, folks.
Thanks, Chris. I'm going to unpin your video and ask, we're going to have questions at the end. I'm just going to make sure Jude is ready to speak. Jude, you want to start your video? There's Jude. And you can unmute yourself too. Jude, are you going to be sharing screen?
Yes.
Okay. Take it away when you're ready. And I'm going to pin your video too.
We're still viewing Chris's screen.
Yeah. Chris, do you want to end your screen share?
Yeah, I'm just trying to get it back up in full screen here. Oh, there we go.
Jude, if you start your screen, maybe start your share, maybe you can come up.
Yeah, it's supposed to, okay, it's almost stop share. There we go. Okay.
Okay, Jude Dealman with an aquarium behind him.
Yeah.
Right. I'm talking about the natural wildlife in the Thames River, fish, amphibians, and a bit of reptiles too. My experiences with the river have been paddling, fishing, wading, sort of things like that. This picture is me and a friend kayaking. This one is fishing. I don't have a picture of me wading, but me and my siblings would wade in the river a lot down by that beach area by the creek outflow. This picture is a panoramic picture I took. I messed it up, so the bridge looked messed up, but I thought I would add it in anyways. So the fish of the Thames is what I'm going to be talking about mostly. This poster is a really great poster. I have one. My friend has one. It's just a really great resource. So I'll be talking about individual fish species, starting with endangered ones. The silver shiner is considered a species at risk. I will not try to pronounce its scientific name because then my talk would be twice as long as it's supposed to be. I have caught one, I believe. It might have been a different species, but I think this was it. We were wading a few years back, and then I swooped my net in at a group of small fish, and then I caught one of these. I don't have a picture of that, though, unfortunately. The eastern sand darter is another one that I've seen around here. Yeah, I've heard it. They're endangered, though I think I've caught one down at the island past the train bridge. So yeah, they're very cool fish. Now moving on to the invasive species. The round goby, it is said to live in the Thames River. I have not seen it here. I believe that it is. I've not seen it anywhere actually, but it is taking over. It's a big problem. Yeah. The common carp, I have not caught them. I've seen them many, many times. I often go walking around the river, wading. I see them. I think that's what they are. I've seen them all the time. Yeah, they are invasive, breeding. You can see them breeding now, I think. Goldfish are also a big problem in the Thames River. The poster that I have, it says they are mostly found in ponds and lakes and reservoirs and stuff like that. I've seen them in the Sifton Bog a few years back. The last times I've gone there, though, I have not seen them. I've only seen them that one time. So I don't know if they were removed or what, but they grow really big. The problem is from people that release their pets. That's why there's invasive lionfish down in the Gulf of Mexico. So if you have any fish, do not release them into the wild. Any pets, don't do that. Now moving on to other fish that are not invasive or endangered. The northern pike is one that lives around here a lot. I've caught it twice. I've not caught a lot of fish, so you know it's pretty good. I've caught 2 of them. That picture up here is me with one. That was the smaller one I caught. I caught one that was quite a bit bigger. Yeah, they're very cool fish. I like them a lot. One thing I forgot to say earlier on the, let me go back a few slides. On this poster, it has the part of the Thames. So North and South Thames is where we are. There's warm water streams, London to Chatham, Chatham to Lake St. Clair, cold water streams, reservoirs and ponds. This is what I was talking about with the goldfish. A lot of the species I mentioned are not listed under here. They're listed in other places. A lot of the ones that I will be mentioning too. But this little piece right here, I wrote it down. It says, these are medium-sized rivers, 15 to 20 meters wide, with an average depth of 1 meter. These are slow-flowing streams, slow-flowing stretches up to 4 meters deep, as well as shallower, fast-flowing sections that the stream bottom is made mostly of boulders and cobbles with gravel, sand, and silt. If you spend any time in the river, you'll see that it is true. There's a lot of smaller boulders, not too many big ones, but there are a few, and a lot of sand and silt from the city and all that. So yeah, this is a really cool poster. Here we are. Yeah, the long-nosed gar is a species that I see fairly often. I've caught one. This picture here I took myself. This one I did not. But you can see they have like really nice finnage on some of them. They're very bright, not necessarily bright colored, very colorful fins though. We see them a lot. I've seen them in like big schools. Like I just am kayaking and I see massive schools of up to like 18, I think. Not too big species, not too big specimens. They grow a lot bigger than the ones I see, but they're in a school at the top, so it's really cool when I see those. Smallmouth bass. These live here a lot. I actually think I saw one today when I was out for a run. I saw a few of them at one place. It was on the other side of the river from where I am, on that retaining wall by the train bridge. Yeah, my friend has caught one once. That was pretty cool. The reason why I have 2 pictures of a fish here is because this one here is a smallmouth bass, and this one is a largemouth bass. The way you can tell them apart is because they're very, very similar. I've seen they're mostly just get their coloration from where they're living. I went to a lake up north. I caught a smallmouth bass. Someone caught a largemouth bass. His was like 1 inch bigger than mine, and the fish looked exactly the same except for this one thing. If you notice on the smallmouth bass, this like lip part goes up to like the front of the eye, not past it. On the largemouth bass, it goes up to the back of the eye and sometimes even past. So that's how you can tell the difference from them. It's really easy to remember because it's their name. Yeah. The stone cat, this is an interesting one. They really like living here. I was fishing once and I stopped in my kayak. I was in my kayak. I stopped on one of the pillars for the train bridge. And then the person on the other bank managed to catch one that was like really small, like that big. It was really cool. I think I have seen one in the creek that is that Chris has been digging out. So thanks to him for that. I saw it a long time ago, but it was just sitting in the creek a good ways up actually. But yeah, it was really cool. I also may have caught one myself. I'm not sure. I never got a chance to identify the fish I caught because it escaped. But I was up in the North Branch, like just a little ways up. There's this nice shallow part that's like 1 foot, 1 or 2 feet deep. Right along the edge, there's a lot of stone there. It's really large, hard to describe. But so there was a lot of fish there and a lot of crayfish, because I don't see a lot of crayfish anywhere else, but there's a lot of crayfish there. And also we kept on seeing this catfish that was like fairly big. And so we tried to catch it, but we couldn't catch it. We came back again another time. That time I brought a bigger net and a smaller net. And then I caught it in the smaller net. And then as I was going to put it in a container to look at it, it fell out and swam away, of course. So I never got a picture of that, but I think that was a stone cat. So yes, very cool fish. The musk lunge. This is a very large fish. If you're a fisherman, you'll be familiar with this. It's known as the fish of 1,000,000 casts because they're so hard to catch. But if you catch them, they're very rewarding because they can be massive fish. They live in the Thames River. Farther downstream, I think, someone caught one once, and it was like a big surprise for everyone because nobody thought they were in here. But anyways, I just thought I'd add that in here. I don't know if they live at this particular spot, but yeah. Now we're done with the fish part, talking about reptiles. Now, these are the snakes that you will see. Mostly the snakes you'll see around here will be this one, which is the eastern garter snake, and this one, which is the eastern ribbon snake. Yeah. So if you see snakes, they'll probably be this one. But I have seen this one, which was a corn snake. This one I actually took a picture of in my own yard. I saw it last year. And this one down here is a smooth green snake. I have not seen it here. I have not seen it anywhere. But I'm sure it does live here because it likes living in meadows and near streams. So if any of you see it, please tell me because they're my favorite type of snake. Turtles. We have the spiny soft-shell turtle. This is a juvenile or baby. They get really big, like that big, I think. This is the northern map turtle, and this is the Midland painted turtle. The Midland painted turtle is the most common one you'll see, generally the one you'll see. I think I've seen some northern map turtles and maybe some Blandings turtles too, but I did not put a picture of those here. And this one I've seen one last year. This picture here I took myself. The picture is not clear enough for me to identify it. It was last year, so I don't know what that is, but I thought I'd add that picture. Toads. These are the ones up here are the American toads, and the one down here are gray tree frogs. They're not toads, but I thought I'd add them in this slide because they are terrestrial, not aquatic. Right now, you'll be hearing, I think now, you'd still be able to hear the American toads calling at night down by the river. You could hear them a lot earlier in the season. I think they might be winding down now, but you could hear them a lot. They're loud trilling. This is one here. These are the matings. You can see the eggs here. The reason the way you can tell the difference between toad eggs and frog eggs is toad eggs are in a long string, like a long strand, like you see here. So they're very easy to collect if you wanted to put them in your pond or anything. But toad eggs are not in, frog eggs, sorry, are not in long strand. They're in individual balls, all separated. This one here, the gray tree frog, is my favorite type of frog. I have not seen it here. I've seen it once outside of Elmer. But I chose this picture because you can really see the difference between the coloration. This one's like a very bright green, and this one is a darker gray, and they get their coloration from where they're living. These are both the same species. Same with the American toads. I see very, very dark ones, and I see lighter ones and redder ones like these. So yeah, if you catch toads around here or see toads, they're most likely going to be this one. Fowler's, the only other type of toad that lives here is Fowler's toad. But those are endangered, and I would not expect you to see them. But, you know, if you are, that'd be pretty cool. I don't have a picture of those here. Frogs, there aren't too many frogs that I see in the Thames River, honestly. But these are the three most common ones I would expect you to see. The American bullfrog, the green frog, and the leopard frog. Also, I forgot to add the spring peeper. You'll hear them calling in spring. I'm not sure if you still would. But yeah, they're small frogs. They're brown, light brown, and they have this X on their back. So that's how you can know them. Very cool. The frogs, we don't see them very much. Neither do me or my brothers catch them very much. This year we caught a green frog, I think, except it was brown or black because of where it was living, most likely, not necessarily green. But I put that in my pond, but I haven't seen it for the last week or two, so I'm not sure if it didn't like it in my pond, so it left or what. The leopard frog, I've also had one in my pond before, in the old house we had, but that one left a while ago, so that's gone. Yeah, but it was very cool. Nice to having a leopard frog in my pond. So yeah. So that is pretty much the end of my talk. I know it was kind of short, but thank you for listening. And here are all the images I used. A few of them I took myself, but yep, those are the ones that I took off Google. So thanks.
Great. Thank you, Jude. Laurie, are you ready to join us shortly? I'm just making you co-host so you can share your screen.
David, if you could make me co-host as well, because I will be advancing the slides, showing the slides. So I will be sharing the screen.
Perfect.
And Laurie will be talking.
Okay.
There you go. So I'm going to Laurie's camera when I see it. Don't want to see us. Laurie, can you turn on your video? Where are you? Laurie, please turn on your video. I've got Gabor. Yep. Laurie, you need to turn on your video and your audio.
Okay, so I am trying to share the screen. Desktop 1. Okay, and can everybody see I will maximize. Can you see the screen, everyone? David, can you?
Yes,
David, you can see the screen?
yes, the screen is visible.
Okay, and you're reading pollinators and the plants they visit?
Yep.
Okay. Okay, so Laurie, you need to unmute yourself. Okay, Laurie?
I would just start, Gabor, and maybe Laurie will come in presently.
Okay, so maybe what I'll do is to talk about, okay, how do I, okay, there we are. I'm going to talk to you about the Pollinator Pathways project. And then Laurie will talk about pollinators in the neighborhood. So good evening, everybody. It's Gabor Sass speaking. I live at 101 Forward. And a few years ago, I started this project with some friends called the Pollinator Pathways Project. And soon after, Laurie from our street joined. And this year we have Jude Dielman, who just spoke to you about fish and amphibians, and my daughter Sylvia, who also joined. So we have a really nice representation from Kensington Village on our project team. All right, so the goal of this project is really to empower people to plant pollinator habitat. So plants that are inviting for pollinators. And we do this by giving workshops. We've developed a few handouts that are also available online. We have project signs that in various format. One is a yard sign, which you've probably seen around the neighborhood. We also have an online map where you can locate your garden in case you have one. I'm just gonna go back to this one and just to share with you that you can get in touch with and find out more information about the project through, if you go to our website. And from there, you can also click on our Facebook and Instagram link. So please do so if you'd be interested in finding out more. So for the people who have never gardened, we're saying, can you imagine yourself turning a 1 meter by 1 meter area of your lawn into pollinator habitat? So let's start with small steps and build it up there. And we've identified a series of native plants that are easy to grow. The project is not just about the ecology. Of course, that's what we'd like to see is increasing the number and the diversity of pollinators. But we want to achieve this by building a network of people who can share information, who can share seeds, seedlings, and who then have this camaraderie, this feeling of togetherness, that we're all in this together. We are all doing good work to help the natural environment. So the social is just as important as the ecological. And here you can see the map, the Google map, where you can indicate your garden. And you can see a high number of these bubbles in our neighborhood. So let's just have a look at the Kensington Village Pollinator Pathway. So really, it's a small scale pathway. It's a neighborhood level pathway that we've been working on. And since the project started, we've had about 20 brand new gardens pop up, which is really great to see. We've been able to support this by applying for some grants. So grants from the Urban League, from the city, that allowed us to buy plants, soil, and some mulch. So we've been able to spread these around. And you can also see this green dot, which is the community garden on the traffic island. So that was started 2 years ago, and now actively managed by Laurie and some of the other neighbors. So it's really great to see this kind of activity. And by the way, there's many other gardeners who've been long-term gardeners whose dots might not be here. They're not indicating their gardens, but there's a whole wide range of various gardening activity that's happening in the neighborhood. So this is an addition to that. So let's have a look at the community pollinator garden at the traffic island. where we've taken lawn and turned it into this inviting area for pollinators. So you can see some of the work and some of the people who've been helping out here. A year after we've planted, some of those plants are now doing really well. The black-eyed Susan goes along really nicely with this traffic sign, and you can see some of the kids. This is my nephew visiting from Toronto, enjoying this garden. Here it is, the beginning of the middle of last season, and now I'm going to show you a few of the pictures of these newer pollinator gardens. So again, some of these folks don't have any garden experience, and they're starting small. So here's one on the lower left, 1 meter by 1 meter, and so that's what they planted. So looking great. And we have some help from people like Jude and Lori sharing their expertise, helping out these new gardeners getting their pollinator gardens going. So here's a few others. We've built some bee hotels. So in the meantime, we've learned that probably the depth of these is not long enough for the mason bees. So there's a few types of bees that like to nest in these cavities. So we've learned a lot along the way about the habitat requirements, and Lori will say a few more words about that. So here's some beautiful flowers in the food forests that we're also managing and tending. This is the one in West Lions Park. We've hosted, as I said, some workshops. This is the bee hotel construction workshop. Along with some other, I think that day we were planting the food forest, and we had an art hive as part of the 101 day event. So if you've seen the garden signs that are installed in these gardens, and if you look at the back, you can see the 5 tips for a healthy pollinator friendly garden. So make sure that you in case you want to start a garden, or if you have one and you want to make it more pollinator friendly, make sure you follow these tips. No pesticides, diversity of flowers, make sure you have a source of water, mulch lightly, and embrace fall decay. So allow those dead stems to stay up, because there are some cavity nesters that overwinter in them. So keep them up, and then in the spring, once that new growth has started to kick in, then you can start removing the old stems. All right, so I think I have a few more slides. So which species should you pick? Well, there's lots of these lists on the internet, so you can go and just search for it. But we developed an easy a 2-pager that you can follow. So these are the plants that are easiest to grow by a beginner gardener. The key is again to have a diversity of flowers that will flower from spring to fall, because we want to make sure that the pollinators have enough to eat from the time they get active to the time that they go to bed with winter approaching. Okay, so at the end we can talk a bit more about this project if you have some questions. Lori, are you here now?
I'm not
Okay.
seeing Lori, sorry.
All right, so maybe I'll jump to back to the beginning. And I did prepare the slides, but I was not really prepared to talk to them, but I'll do my best. Okay, so I am an ecosystem ecologist, so I look at the big picture, and not so good with identifying different species, although I'm learning every year. So let's talk about pollinators. Well, so we're really looking at a wide range of species, not just the bees, it's the butterflies, there's wasps, moths, beetles, flies, even birds and bats. Although birds, bats, and moths, they become more important in tropical ecosystems. So here the main players are bees and butterflies and some flies. And of course we have the hummingbirds, so they do some pollination as well. And it's when we think about bees, it's not just the honeybees. In fact, we should be more concerned about the native bees. There's over 400 of them in Ontario, because many of them are in steep decline. So that's why we want to be creating these pollinator habitat to help out the native species. And as Chris so eloquently described, ecosystems are a network of relationships. And when you take species out, they will have cascading impacts on the species that eat them, or the species that they help to propagate and they interact with. All right. And when we think about butterflies, it's not just the monarchs. There are over 100 species of butterflies in southern Ontario. So we need to think about the requirements that these species have. So these are pictures from Kensington Village, from around their neighborhood, that I took and maybe some other people took. So you can see some butterflies, some of the bees, some honeybees and other native bees that frequent the flowers in our backyards and down in Cavendish Park. So pollinators are in it for the food. They are not, they don't wake up and say, okay, well, now I'm going to pollinate today. No, so that transfer of pollen from one flower to that's a trick by the plants, right? That they're playing on the
board.
Yes.
Laurie might be here now. Laurie, are you?
Do you hear?
You ready to jump in, Laurie? You can unmute your camera if you want.
I'm on my phone right now, so yeah, I could jump in.
Okay.
Can you see the slides, Laurie?
Yeah, I can see the slides.
Okay, excellent. So I did the introduction, and we are talking now. We're at the point where we're talking about pollinators, as you know. So what these bees and butterflies, what they are interested in is really gaining nectar and food.
Yeah, well, they want to collect the nectar, and when they're collecting the nectar, they go into the plants and they get the pollen. And it's the pollen that when they take the pollen on their body and go into another plant, that's when they pollinate the other plant. That's why they're pollinators. I was going to talk about butterflies. Have you started any of this, Gabor?
Yeah, I can skip to. This is the part of the that there should be a diversity of flowers that we're trying to plant.
So, do you want to do yours now, and I'll do mine at the end?
No, I've said what I plan to say. So I'll just here's the. This slide is on butterflies in the caterpillar stage. So it's important to plant plants for the caterpillar. So go ahead, Laurie.
Okay. Many of the plants that we're putting into our garden for the bees will also work for the other pollinators, such as butterflies, moths, birds. They all like the nectar, and that's what they're attracted to. So they spread the pollen around to all the different plants that they go and visit. That's how we get the seeds, and that's how we get the germination of the seeds, and then the seeds drop and we get more and more plants. So it's very important that we have diversity of all the plants at different times of year, so they are never starved. So we have spring, summer, fall, all different times. And it's very important to have the native plants, because most of our native butterflies, that's what they need as host plants. And the host plants are what the female butterfly lay their eggs on, and the caterpillar comes out after, and the caterpillar has a chance to eat off these host plants. So if you have more and more host plants, you'll have more butterflies in your yard, because that's what the female butterfly wants to lay their eggs on. they also need shelter. So you need the diversity of tall plants and short plants and all different sizes of plants. So when it's storming out or windy out, the butterflies have places to go for protection. And there's a list of host plants. Gabor, do you have that list? Or do you want me to say them?
Here it is.
Yes. This is just a short list. There's many host plants and for many different butterflies. One of the butterflies that we have, they need violets. And if you don't have violets in your garden, you'll never get this little Petilia, I think I said it right, butterfly to your garden. And the most important thing we have to stop ourselves doing is spraying any chemicals on these plants. Because when you spray, you don't know if you're killing the butterfly eggs or the butterfly caterpillars. And if you want butterflies, you can't spray chemicals. That's the short version.
Do you want to say a few words about your garden? I have some pictures here lined up.
Okay, you want to start with the pictures? Okay. I have a different variety of plants. I really try to plant a lot of native plants, and then I have not native plants in my garden too, but that way there I always have something growing. The one in the top left-hand corner is bloodroot. Then the next one in the middle is the corydalis. Then the next one is barrenwort. The bottom left-hand corner is metal rue. The one in the middle on the bottom is the woodland poppy, and the woodland poppy is on an endangered species list. And I'm very lucky that I have it. And don't get it confused with this other poppy that's growing around. That is not the same poppy. It's in a herb category, and they make dye out of that poppy. The next one to it is Solomon seal, and I even know with the Solomon seal, the hummingbirds love it. I have hummingbirds to that plant all the time. Okay. I think I have some pictures of toads and frogs in there somewhere too. But yeah, there's some toads. If you go back one, Gabor. I like mixtures, like there's the ginger, the water leaf, and the bloodroot, and ferns. And here's my violets, and the yellow violets, bloodroot again. Okay. And if you've noticed, I have plants all over the place. That way the creatures all have some place to hide. And in my garden, the creatures rule. I have the mallard ducks. They just kicked me out of my driveway, so I had to come in the house. And then also the corner garden down on forward has a wide range of plants in it, and it's almost ready to be divided. So I do have plants available down there. Or we do. Correct, Gabor? We do.
Sorry, I was looking at Toby, getting ready for his story.
I'm done.
All right. So this was our little spiel on pollinators in the hood. And now we're going to switch gears a little bit. So I have Toby here sitting next to I'm going to stop sharing. Well, actually, sorry, I'm going to go back to share the screen one more time. So I do have some visuals because I have Toby here, my son, who's going to read a story from his from his book that we published a collection of short stories called Toby's Tall Tales. And he's going to read one of those stories. So in this book, he has lots of neat little short stories on different animals, rhinoceros, monkeys, even a 7-headed dragon. And this one is on the great horned owl. Now I'm just looking for, there it is. All right, so everyone can see the picture? And
Yep.
so Toby, read as loudly as you can, okay? Yeah.
Plato, the great horned owl. Once in a forest in Ontario lived a great horned owl. His name was Plato. Plato had reddish-brown, black and white feathers with wings that stretched out to 5 feet long on each side of his body. Plato was the best hunter in the forest. His sharp eyes, which were big and yellow, helped him catch small animals at night. He had 4 talons on each leg, 2 on the front and 1 on the back, and the 4th was able to move backwards or forwards to help grip its prey. One night, when Plato was night dreaming, he heard a twig snap with his super sensitive ears. He flew towards the sound, swooped down, and grabbed the unlucky mouse and ate it whole. Later, Plato was enjoying the starry sky, and he got a glimpse of a she-owl. Plato turned to look at her. She was beautiful, with sparkling brown feathers. Then Plato swooped down, caught another mouse quickly, and flew to her to offer her the gift of food. Her name was Jeannie. Jeannie thanked Plato. Plato did a backflip above and glided back to Jeannie. Jeannie hooted to Plato, meaning that they could live together. Plato and Jeannie flew away to look for a home. They found an empty hole in a thick, tall pine tree, which they would lay their eggs in. Jeannie laid her eggs and waited about 30 days for the eggs to hatch. While she was sitting on her eggs, Plato was hunting for food. Finally, one egg cracked, then another, a third, and then the last one. Plato had food ready for the 4 owlets. As the owlets were eating in the safety of the nest, Plato and Jeannie named the owlets Perhido, Pronel, Planio, and Penelio. A few days later, when Plato was going for an evening fly, he saw a crow. How wonderful, he thought. After, 2 more crows went by. I guess these crows like doing evening flies too, thought Plato. Then a whole flock of crows went by. That's very strange. And as Plato turned his head all the way around towards his back, he saw that the crows were going in the direction of his home. I have to see what they are doing, thought Plato, quite nervous. Quickly, he flew back to his home. When he got there, the crows were mobbing Plato's nest in the pine tree. Jeannie and the owls were hooting with fear. Plato was furious, and with his knife-sharp, curved beak and his 4 talons outstretched on each foot, he pecked and chased the crows away. He silently followed the crows to where they were sleeping and later pounced on all of them. Plato did this the next day as well. The crows started being very afraid of Plato, the great horned owl. Plato raided all the crows' nests from time to time to show them who the boss of the forest was. From that time on, crows never dared to harm Plato and his family or any other owl for that matter. When a month passed, the owls were able to fly. Another 3 months went by, and they were strong hunters of their own and superb flyers. We are going to one of my old friends' home, announced Plato one day. And who is that? Asked Planio. That is Gordon Goose, replied Plato. How are we? Now, no more questions, Planio, interrupted Plato. They flew together, Plato leading the way, the owlets behind him, and lastly Jeannie. They finally arrived at a lake. On the lake sat Gordon Goose. How pleasant it is here, don't you think? Honked Gordon when he saw the owl family land on a branch of a nearby tree. And hello to all of you, he continued. It's been so long since we have seen each other. I'm very happy to see you. Hello, said Pollinator. And who are these young fellows? Asked Pollinator. Asked Gordon, looking at the owlets. The owlets introduced themselves. Glad to meet you, said Gordon. How are you doing? Asked Pollinator. Good, I guess, said Gordon in a sad way. Just that a bunch of crows took over my nesting ground. Oh, don't worry, we'll handle them, said the family. They quietly flew towards Gordon's nest and saw that the crows were eating popcorn and watching TV. Hi, crows. It's been so long since we last saw you, said Plato in a sassy voice. All the crows turned around and were freaked out. They have 6 strong fighters now. Fly for your lives, crowed the crows. Everyone jumped out of their seats and flew away in panic. Well, that was easy, said Jeannie. They turned around and there was Gordon, shocked, but also very relieved. Thank you, said Gordon. How about we go for an evening fly? Said Gordon. Asked Plato. Sure, they all said. They flew over the hills toward the mountains, and the last sound that was heard was a hoot from an owl and a honk from a goose.
All right, thank you, Toby.
Thank you, Toby, Gabor, Lori.
Yeah. Speaking about hooting owls, there's some hooting going on every night.
Yeah.
There's a family of owls great horned owls in our neighborhood. So I'm going to stop screen share and give the word over to David.
Well, it's actually Dave Jolly who's going to introduce himself. I'm going to run his slideshow, so I'm just going to grab his slideshow now. And Dave Jolly can introduce himself if he starts his camera. So.
Yes, can you see me?
Not yet.
See and hear? No.
I can see you. I can see you, Dave.
Okay. Yeah, everything's unmuted here.
Very good. And we'll go over here.
Okay.
By the way, can you see
All
that?
right, so I can see that. Let's start the slide presentation.
You can introduce yourself.
Okay, so thank you very much. Dave Jolly. I'm a terrestrial ecologist with Earth Quest Canada for the Environment. So I'm actually jumping back into Cavendish Park after what is now I'm trying to think of the number of years. It's been 22-year absence. So I worked on Cavendish. I got some grants, worked on Cavendish, hired a bunch of people, did some scientific studies, studied the soil, the land, the birds, the wildlife, the plants. So my presentation is on the bird life, which I wrote a book on, published that in 2002 out of the grant money that I got from the federal government. So the talk focuses around what's covered in the book, and I'll be speaking anecdotally about other things. Now, can you see me? Hang on, I don't see myself. Can you see me in the video?
Yeah.
Yes, you're on screen.
Okay, all right. So now on to the next screen. Incidentally, Earth Quest Canada for the Environment started as a non-profit organization. It didn't have a charitable number at first. That was back in 1988. 1997, I got a charitable number. It became registered as a registered Canadian charity, operated that in that capacity until 2010. So some of the proceeds from fundraising, which was benefit concerts, charity casinos, we actually did a walkathon event to raise money for the Eastern Spiny Softshell Turtle back in 1995, some of which went through Cavendish Park. But we shut down operations as a charity in 2010, and now I operate it as a consulting firm and a school where you can get certified. These are the topics I'll be addressing. So on the bird life, the background and the description of the birds, the history, the species that are both endemic, native, and like migratory and non-resident birds that visit the park, the nesters, the breeders, their status, distribution, and occurrence in the province, which kind of gets a little bit technical, but I'll define what I mean. And then some of the problems around the park that you might be aware of in the form of vandalism. So if we move on to the next slide, that jumps into the south view of the park. So that was just taken last week, as I actually hadn't been to the park in 22 years. So that was my first visit there. I used to live in the area. So across the river is Evergreen Ave. I lived there in the 70s as a kid. So I used to romp around Cavendish and play hooky from what is now the museum, which was a school, Riverview Public School. I went there from kindergarten to grade 3, I believe. And then my grandmother used to live on Cavendish Crescent. 85 Cavendish was where she lived up until about 1990. So I'm quite familiar with the area. It's interesting that it's what started as a childhood playground became a place of work where I worked for 8 years. So I know it quite well. I've got fond memories. Moving on to the next slide. Yeah, so some of that I just said. So about my childhood. Interesting to note as well that probably one of the first birds I ever remember seeing, but could not identify for obvious reasons, was a ruby-crowned kinglet. I saw that when I was about 5 years old, and that is one of my first memories. Oh, okay. So the project on Cavendish Park itself, from the scientific standpoint, began in 1995, in July of that year, with volunteers from Germany, Belgium, and England, courtesy of Service Civil International, which is an international volunteer service organization that sent volunteers abroad to assist with work programs. So that therein began the Cavendish Trail Project in its infancy, and the scientific studies of everything there by myself and volunteers, staff, and anybody else that I could grab. Okay, on to the next slide, please. There's the ruby-crowned kinglet. That's an adult male. I don't know if you can see it, but there's a little red patch on the crown, which is diagnostic. You can tell the sexes apart. The females don't have the red, but you typically see the red. Probably you can't see it there because it's not agitated. Usually when they're agitated, they poke the little red feathers up as a sign of alarm. That was my first bird I remember seeing. I didn't know what it was when I was 5, but I think when I started seriously birding, by the time I was 14, I did figure out that it was a ruby-crowned kinglet. Okay, next one, please. So the park itself is very small, measures about 12 hectares. There are about almost 2.5 kilometer trails intersecting what were earlier described as open meadow, I'll add river floodplain and woodland. It's interesting that the community description that was given earlier almost exactly tie into what I classified using my certification. I'm an ecological land classifier, which is a designation from the Ministry of Natural Resources. You have to take a course in order to do that. So I did an ecological land classification of Cavendish, and it almost exactly matches what was given earlier. which I find very interesting. So I'll add that from a geological standpoint, Cavendish and the river was under about a kilometer rather, of glacial ice about 10 to 14,000 years ago. So that left glacial till and mixtures of sand, silt, and clay with gravel. I don't have the clay in there, but the clay is in there, just not very much of it. On to the next slide, please. So this is an original, this is from my report, 1996, the first draft of the Cavendish Trail and Park report. We had to produce this report for the government because, of course, they gave us money and they want something for it. So we gave them this report, and that's one of the earliest maps that I put together showing the trail system. We marked them. They're in 100-meter increments. The longest stretch is what I call Trail B, which runs adjacent to it on the very southern edge of that frame there. Adjacent to the river is going from the park boundary itself over to Warncliffe, the Warncliffe Bridge. That's Trail B. So that's about almost 600 meters. And then you can see that the actual Cavendish Park boundary on the northern corner there. And then the western reaches running adjacent to the sea and rail tracks. So we hiked those trails predominantly every day during work hours from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. each day, surveying all flora and fauna, especially the birds, documenting everything we could find. And I believe the next slide will show the breakdown of the results. Oh, no, it's an aerial imagery. Okay, so aerial imagery, infrared. So the yellow area highlights the actual area bounded by this study, the Cavendish Park and Trail System Project that was initiated in 1995, but didn't really get started in terms of funding until 1999 and continued until 2003. So that imagery is from 1997, which hasn't changed very much since, but it's interesting because it shows the leaf on, and the red are the trees. The lighter grayer areas are the open meadows, those that are both manicured and overgrown. Okay, onward, please. Yeah, so that's just identifying where the funding came from. It was people on employment insurance that were getting the benefit of working on my project, and thanks to them, there were about 30 volunteers, staff, and students through my school that eventually ended up working on the project, devoting over 10,000 hours of data. So we have a lot of data. If we can move on. What do we do with that data? Well, some of it went into the book on the birds of Cavendish. Now, sorry, the print is a little bit small there. I apologize. But that says that the park is home to over 330 species of vascular plants, which I define as all trees, shrubs, wildflowers, grasses, sedges, rushes, ferns, and their allies, which are club mosses. So those are vascular plants, which means they have chlorophyll, which is the green pigment that makes them green. They have a vascular system, which means they can carry water and nutrients through the vascular, which is like our circulatory system, through the plant. So we documented all those and over 330 species. So it's quite diverse. We found 5 mammals, at least 3 species of amphibians and reptiles, including the endangered eastern spiny softshell turtle. It was not endangered at the time of study. It was only threatened then. Now it's endangered on the endangered species list, and 91 bird species. Now, the next slide discusses that we actually found more, or sorry, we added more than the 91 species. That we actually found, with the help of an area resident, his name is Gerd Mueller. I don't think is around anymore because he was in up there in years. This was in the 90s. He contributed and added a total to the list. We came up with 113 species. So he added to the 91, but those were not confirmed. The 91 is what's in the book. So that's the survey methodology that we use to document all the birds. We use square quadrant method, which is you divide we had, I believe, 60 square quadrants, which were in 15 by 15 meter dimensions. This was before the 1993 Rio summit, when the International Forestry dimensions of 20 by 20 came out. So we used 15 by 15. And then you survey everything within that 15 by 15 meter quadrant, which is quite tedious. And then there random area search, which is just walking the trails randomly and documenting whatever you see. That's good for rare species. If you're looking for rare species, use that method. And then we used mist netting. I actually hired somebody from Bird Studies Canada, and she came in with mist nets and netted for about 3 days. And that's to pick up the elusive species, things like brown thrashers, which you don't see because they don't like to show them that they're very shy, right? And then frequency of sightings, which is a survey methodology invented by EarthQuest, which is based on vegetation density. So in dense vegetation, the frequency of sightings it actually goes down because it's so dense, and in less dense vegetation, it goes up because you can see further. So those 4 methods is how we surveyed the birds. Next slide, please. So all that went into the what we showcase as the 91 species of birds, the birds of Cavendish, the surrounding area. You can actually find this book, do a Google search, Google Books. I'm not sure if that's how Gabor found it, but you can only get it through me. You have to order it online, and then I send you a PDF file because we have no printed copies. We all sold out of those, unfortunately. But I think Susan Price got a copy of one of those when it first came out in 2002. We have since updated it. Actually, Gabor, you triggered me to update it. So I added a few more species since the original publication in 2002. It's a great book because it's probably, like, it's a local publication. It's probably the only book available on the birds of Cavendish. I don't think anybody else has done anything else. It shows their status, their arrival departure dates, their breeding. There's nice photos in there, and there's a seasonal status chart showing when they are present and when they're absent. Next slide, please. And that book is available for $25 if you want it. That is me in my survey mode as a consultant, because the orange vest, I don't wear that when I'm not working as a consultant. But there you go. Even that picture's a few years old. Next one, please. So what that small print is trying to say is, I'm going back to my introduction of Mr. Gerd Mueller, a local area resident who lived, I think, on Forward Ave in the 1990s. So he had been collecting data on the birds, anecdotally, incidental observations, since 1946. So he added 3, I would say, accidental species, meaning birds that show up accidentally in Ontario. They don't necessarily breed here, but you may see them 4 to 10 times per year in any given year. So he added the little blue heron to the official Cavendish Park list, Virginia's warbler, and the black whiskered vireo. They haven't been seen since, I would say probably because the habitat has changed so much and global warming. But that is not to say that they won't show up again. I'm sure if you walk the trails enough with a pair of binoculars, you may just see them. Any bird can show up at Cavendish, I must stress, especially during migration. There was also the bottom paragraph there. It says that there was a black vulture added by one of my staff members in, I believe, 2003. Nope, it says 2002 there. Yes. So she added that, but I didn't add that to the book because I couldn't confirm it. She saw it, but I didn't see it, so I couldn't confirm it. And birders are very picky. So unless it's seen by more than one person, they don't really count that. But I will mention it here because it's a significant observation. But again, it's an accidental species. It's not normally found here. The next slide, please. So I'm showing this map because this shows the ecoregions of the province of Ontario, of which there are 5. So going from top to bottom, the tundra, which also can be considered the Arctic, or the bottom reaches of the Arctic, the boreal barrens, or the subarctic. So those are like the Hudson's Bay lowlands, places like Moosonee and Churchill, and Churchill's in Manitoba, but adjacent, that's part of the barren tundra, the boreal barrens. The boreal forest, which is also called taiga in Russian, that's the coniferous forest, the great pine forest of the north. The mixed forest, so that's coniferous and deciduous trees, which surrounds the Great Lakes. And then the far south there, we're in the deciduous forest, which some people also refer to as the Carolinian Forest region. So Cavendish obviously lies within the deciduous forest region. So we have species of birds that can be found in the South Carolinas. A bit further south, they also come because we're at the northern end of the range. So I'm stressing this because when I'm talking about distribution of the birds, I'm referring to this map. Next slide, please. So to talk about bird populations, we skipped a slide there. Go back one, please. That one, yeah. We got to stay on there on point for a minute, because when we're talking about bird populations, we need to talk about distance. So that previous slide was showing the distance between bird populations is the scientific definition of what a bird population. It's not staying on that slide for some reason. Okay, so if you're 4 kilometers apart, you are a different population. According to, that's the definition by the Committee on the Status of Endangered Wildlife in Canada, CIWIC. That's their definition. But the NHIC, which is the Natural Heritage Information Center, says that if you're 3 kilometers apart, you are a bird population. So what I'm saying there is they are in contradiction. They don't agree. The federal government, which is CIWIC, and the provincial government, which is NHIC, do not agree in what you call a bird population. So that factors into some confusion as to what exactly a bird population is and how far apart they need to be. But for the purposes of the Birds of Cavendish book, I'm going with the provincial designation of 3 kilometers apart to call a bird a population. So when I say the Baltimore Oriole population at Cavendish Park, I'm saying that that population is at least 3 kilometers from the neighboring population that may be breeding nearby. They have to be 3 kilometers apart for me to call that a different population of birds, okay? So the next slide, we're done with that one, thank you. This slide here defines the status in the province according to the Natural Heritage Information Center, NHIC, based out of Peterborough. They have assigned S ranks as the status designation for birds, plants, mammals, all flora and fauna in the province. So what they're saying is to be called an S5, which means you're very common, you have to have greater than 1,000 records, populations, or occurrences in the province of Ontario. Okay, so if there's a bird population, remember I'm saying that at least 3 kilometers apart, in order to be S5, there are over 1,000 records or nests that have been found, for example, of those birds in the province to be called an S5. S4 means there's 80 to 1,000, or sorry, 81 to 1,000 records, populations, or occurrences. S3, so S4 is common. S3 is rare. There's 21 to 80 records, populations, or occurrences. S2 is 6 to 20 records, populations, or occurrences. That's very rare. S2 is very rare. S1 is extremely rare. There are 1 to 5 records, populations, or occurrences. So in addition to the designation of endangered, threatened, special concern, they also have these S ranks on top of that. All right, so for example, the wood poppy that was referred to earlier has an endangered status federally and provincially, but it's also got an S1 rank in the province of Ontario because there are fewer than 6 populations, records, or occurrences in the entire province. So it's an S1 ranked plant. It's extremely rare. Okay, so we need to talk about that a little bit, or I will, when I'm talking about bird status at Cavendish. Next slide, please. So here is what I would refer to as probably the rarest bird at Cavendish Park. That's a great egret. So it's the designation SB3 means it's rare. So there's like 80 to 1,000 records, populations, or occurrences in the province. The B means during breeding. So only during breeding is it rare. Non-breeding is not rare. I believe it's S4 rank in non-breeding, like outside the breeding season. So right now it's the breeding season. They're coming here to breed. So if you see a great egret in the park, it's a rare bird. Okay, so I've got information about the habitat there, the ecology, which is all extracted out of the book and the birds of Cavendish, on how to identify them. The ecology specifies the forest region that they like to breed in, which is the Carolinian forest region, the deciduous forest, or maybe the extreme southern mixed deciduous forest. So there's 2 forest regions there. I describe what they like to eat. They're opportunistic feeders, feeding on fish and invertebrates like crayfish. They love the river's edge. And they tend to arrive around between May 7 and 19, which is right about now, and they leave the province to go back to their wintering grounds around mid-August, somewhere between mid-August to 3rd week of September. That's when they depart the province. So they don't overwinter. They're migratory. They may breed here, but they don't stay here. Okay, so the next slide is probably the next rarest bird that was documented at Cavendish by accident. So I happened to be walking down Trail B along the river's edge during the winter of January, I believe it was 2002. That was a good year, 2002. We saw the black vulture and this bird. So previous slide, please, David. That was a immature winter redneck grebe. Okay, so that was the earliest record of a redneck grebe in London, Ontario, never documented before in the month of January. They've been seen in April and I believe March, but not January. Okay, so that's a very significant observation for Cavendish, probably the most significant observation. And that was confirmed by Mackworth field naturalist Pete Reed, my friend at Pete Reed. He's an expert birdie. I worked with him at Point Keenan National Park as a bird hike leader. So that's an official record. I believe it might have gone off the Ontario field ornithologist. Okay, the next slide. So these are the more common species found at Cavendish. The American goldfinch, that's a spring plumage male. They are breeders of the park. They were found nesting and breeding. They're late breeders. They tend to start right about now, May, but they may breed as late as September. They may have 4 or 5 broods per year. And they're quite colorful. Some people describe these, that maybe they don't know them, they might just describe them as a canary, but they're not canaries. They're finches. They're seed eaters. And you'll find them at your feeders. You can put seeds that they like to eat out. Probably the most common bird at Cavendish is the American goldfinch. The next slide, please. So this is the Baltimore oriole. That is makes a cup-shaped hanging nest in the fork of a tree. That's a female. The females are not as brightly colored as the males. The males are orange and black. The females may be kind of a dusky, orangey color on the breast and the flanks, which are the sides with the black ones, but they're not jet black. They're more of a brownish black. So orioles are actually blackbirds. They're in the blackbird family. And I would say they're probably the next most common bird species that's both seen and heard in the park. They tended to be found in the mature forest or along the edge of the younger growth, along the edge of the water. And they are also nesters. So what I'm presenting here are the confirmed nesters in the park. The next slide will show another species that's very common. This is a fledgling, so that's a house wren. Again, a confirmed breeder in the park. Its cousin, the Carolina wren, I believe has been heard in the park. These guys are cavity nesters. They like to nest where they can find a cavity in it, like a tree hole, or if you put a nest box up, they love those. They're very noisy. They're what I call they're a tiny bird. They're only about 4 to 5 inches, but they made a big voice. They have a big voice, big sound. If you remember your pop music genre, I believe it was Rick Ashman, the little guy with the red hair, with the big voice. That's a wren. Okay, they're big voice. And so if you hear a big voice in the woods, it's probably a wren. Kind of a cascading, downward descending sound to it. Sounds like a waterfall almost. Okay, the next slide. So all these birds that I'm showing now are S5 rank. I forgot to mention, the red-necked grebe is actually also an S5. So there was a talk there, a nice story about the great horned owl. I thought I'd throw this in because this is an eastern screech owl, which had been found nesting in the park. There was a family that we found, and they're very noisy. They sound like babies when the male, or well, they sound like a baby to me, but they actually sound more like a horse that's whinnying when they're singing their territorial song. Found at dusk and in the evening hours, I would say before midnight. And then that last slide. Okay, so this is the vandalism. So we as a nonprofit group, we did get funding to put signage up all along the trail system. That's one of the signs there that was vandalized actually very quickly. We actually raised, I think, about $15,000 for signage around the park. And then we also built that stairwell or refurbished it on the west end there, going up towards Ford Ave. That all came out of funding that we raised, some of which also came from Urban League and a few other funding sources. But it's sad to see that the signage has been all vandalized. It was nice signage too, showed the what was in there and the flora and the fauna. And then the other problem was dumping. I have actually seen people drive their trucks right up to the edge of the park, dismissing or not obeying any city bylaw signs whatsoever, and just dumping the garbage into the woodland there. So yeah, that was very disturbing to see. I think I called that one into the city. I don't know what they did about it, but that is against the rules there. And it also introduces some of the invasives. So, if you take your grass cuttings and you're dumping them, along the edge of the park, those will have seeds, and what will come up next will be like garlic, mustard, and Japanese knotweed and things like that. Even giant hogweed come up that way. So you don't want to be doing that as well. So be vigilant of that and wary of people doing that. That should be discouraged. It doesn't help the native bird life or plant life in any way. Okay, I think that is the bulk of it. If we show the next slide, I think that's the book. No, that's one of my other books. Sorry, I'm showcasing another book. I've got a book on asters and goldenrods if you're interested. I think that's the end of the slide. So if you want to, you can Google EarthQuest Canada. You can find these things online, help yourself. I think what we wanted to show next, David, was the short video clip. I managed to get some nice footage of a yellow rump warbler, also called a myrtle warbler, an adult male during breeding. And he's very docile. He was kind enough to let me video him for about a minute and a half. So I just wanted to see if we can show that, and that'll close me off.
Okay.
Okay, so ends the question. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dave. So it is just 9. Some people have been asking when we're going to end. I think some people have to leave. We did want to hear from a bit more about sightings of animals in the neighborhood. So I'm at your disposal, folks. Do we have some questions from the people in attendance? But Susan, did you want to share some sightings?
Hi. I only, they're very brief. How many questions do you have? Maybe we should do
There's
a little.
one question about one of the plants.
Okay, well, should I just, it'll take like 3 minutes. Want me to do this?
Yeah, please do.
Okay, so my task was to find stories from neighbors about close encounters with wildlife in the neighborhood or memorable stories from Cavendish Park. And I asked for photos as well, so I thank you to Marissa and Ashley for sending in photos. Some of them we saw earlier in the webinar. I had one person send me a really short story, and she has a pair of wild mallards that come to her feeder and feed every night. So she wrote, last night around 5, I was outside cleaning up and my pair of ducks came up for their dinner and went under the bird feeder. Then there was so much noise and flapping of wings, etc. When I saw was a big hawk trying to get the female duck. He must have had her and dropped her in our pond, where she stayed for a few minutes and then flew off. Of course, my cat was right there too. We have to watch our animals around here, especially with the birds of prey that we have. I was certainly out shouting and did manage to scare away the hawk. So yeah, there's lots of white-tailed hawks in the neighborhood, and I have seen many do dive bombing into the backyards. Oh my God. So I have a story because my backyard backs onto the woods. So one day about 10 years ago, I was gardening at the very back of my yard, and I heard this mewing sound. It sounded like a bawling young calf. And it went on for quite a long time. So I went down to investigate. I was afraid there was an animal that was hurt down there. So I followed the sound through the woods. I just walked not too far. And then a few feet in front of me, this adult doe stuck her head up. And then she stood up and then turned around and ran away. And I saw underneath her tail was clearly an afterbirth. And then moments later, a very tiny and very newborn fawn stuck up her head. And it was an amazing sight. It was the best thing I'd seen for a long time. It was so special to have seen that. So, but I was very worried that I'd separated the mother and the fawn. So I went up to my house and Googled and did some research and found out that the does often leave their fawns for periods of time, and that when fawns are born, they're not unscented. They don't have any scent. And the doe continues to keep their fawn unscented by eating her urine and her droppings. So she's quite safe to leave the fawn, and they're very well camouflaged because of the white spots on their back. So that was a pretty special encounter for me. We see lots of animals around here. That's just one little small snippet of what goes on around here. So I thank Jill for her story, and that's my brief story. And I'm just very lucky to live in this neighborhood, and we can coexist happily with the wildlife around us. So that's all I have to say. So on to the question.
Great, and we'll go to panel view. If Dave and I don't know if Jude's still there and Gabor want to come back to your cameras. The question from Deborah is, how long does it take hogweed to get that tall? And I guess that was Chris's picture of hogweed. Chris has had to leave, but there was a big picture of hogweed in Chris's slides. Does anybody know how long it takes to get that tall?
Sure, I can answer that question, or I'll try. So giant hogweed is a perennial, so it takes several years to get the stalk with the flower head on it.
Yeah.
We'll call it 3. So that plant in the slide was probably, I would say, 4 or 5 years old. They can probably live about 7 or 8 years, then they die back and they get seeded down again and they start up again.
Okay, thank you. And I'm seeing something else in the question. Oh no, that's the same question. So that was answered.
I have a question.
Oh.
Dave, can you tell me what the bird was saying behind the video when you were playing the video? There's a bird.
The bird singing behind the video was.
Yeah.
That's a good question. That was a veery.
Okay, I've been trying to figure that out for a long time. Very fluty. Nice. And great book,
Yeah.
by the way. Great book. I enjoy your book.
Thank you very much.
Dave, I have a quick question as well. Would you have the content that you created for those signs down in the park? Could we bring them again?
If we want to bring those signs back, I believe copies of all of them were with the city Parks and Rec department. They should still be there because they were digital copies that were made. They were created within the City of London's Parks and Rec. They made them. So my guess is that they must still have a copy.
Okay, great, thanks.
You're welcome.
And can we get an access to the report you wrote?
Yes, photocopied access. Well, I could probably PDF it and put it on my website and give you a password if you want a copy. Now, there were several, I've lost track. It's been 22 years. There were several versions. There were several drafts made. So what I have to find is the last draft, the master draft that was made. And it's either in printed format, in which case I make a PDF, or there might be a file somewhere on a CD. So just give me some time. I have to dig for it. Sure.
Okay, well, I'm sure there's more questions, and as you leave, you'll see the Kensington Village area and Wood Street Food Forest Park Facebook group. You're welcome to ask us more questions there and pass more questions along there. So I'm going to try to go out with some music here from, where are we? Nope. I've got to go back and find the music. Yeah, music from the Kensington Village. Well, images that people have contributed of the wildlife in the area, and music from the Ear to the Ground music a series in the park a few years back. And this here we have the Heartaches.
Tonight, 'cause when the trouble lights are glowing
That was London's own Heartache String Band coming to you from Kiva. And good night, everyone. Thank you for coming.